So he just had his own, his own little campaign going on, and what's now called the Campaign for Liberty. And I am a big endorser of this because, it's just the idea, the basic principles of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin. It's the idea of being free. It's the idea that nobody owns you but you. Government can't tell you what to do. That's why we have a Bill of Rights, but they're violating those just about every day. Notice after I believe it was only within a month of 9/11, the Patriot Act was passed into law, and the House of Representatives, it was a House of Representatives bill, and they had 15 minutes to read it. 15 minutes to read the bill, and they passed it somehow. Why would you vote on a bill that you can't read? This was 8 years ago. Amazingly, it passed. The freedom of speech was inhibited. It allows police to write their own search warrants, and that goes against the Fourth Amendment. It's just ridiculous. It's an illegal search and seizure. That in itself goes against our founding principles because the British troops were allowed to, go into people's houses and search for any kind of papers that people would have, and make sure that they had the king's stamp on it. That was called the Stamp Act. That was a tax, and people could, the police could actually go into people's houses and look through their desk drawers for papers. And that's exactly what they can do now with the Patriot Act. Now, that just makes me mad as all, it makes me mad. And there was a quote from Andrew Napolitano. He was a judge in New Jersey back in the early 90s. And he works for Fox right now. He was making a speech at the Future of Freedom Foundation, and he called it the most abominable, unconstitutional, hateful, from the point of freedom, piece of legislation since the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. There has been no law since 1798 as bad as the Patriot Act. I have to agree with him. If you can inhibit freedom of speech by, okay, so police can go into a business such as AT&T, or they can take information about individual people and they can gag the people about that. They can tell them that they cannot tell those people that that information has been taken from them. They can't tell anybody at that. They can't. So if AT&T has a customer, that customer will not know that his information is being taken from AT&T and given to the government. And theoretically, it's about terrorism. Terrorism is the most illogical thing I've ever heard in my life, but it's a reason for tyranny. You may not understand it. We go through our days. For the past 8 years, we've gone through our days without much of a problem. We go, to work, we go to school, nothing happens. It's just a normal day. Nothing happens. It's under the radar. You don't notice it. And to top it off, I want to, the idea of the war on terror, or the original idea, was to protect us from the terrorists. And that's why our troops are over in Afghanistan and Iraq, to, protect us from terrorism. And now it's to just nation build. But the war on terror was an idea of security for us. But if you heed the words of one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary security deserve neither and will lose both. That is Benjamin Franklin's words, and you see it now. You don't actually, I take it back, like I said, you don't see it, but it is inevitable that it will come. Case in point, what happened at the G20 meeting, last week. Today's October 1st, to reiterate. It's Thursday, October 1st, 2009, and this was, I believe, Thursday and Friday, or Friday and Saturday of last week. At the G20, people were protesting. You know, people always protest. That's what freedom of speech allows for. But I don't know if you noticed, but police, Pittsburgh police, the state police of Pennsylvania, federal cops, and people in black, just labeled police, 4,000 of these people were brought to the G20 protests, and they were basically, to inhibit freedom of speech, even though it was under the guise of security for everybody, to protect us from maybe, a little rioting. There's no reason to have 4,000 police to protect rioting. 4,000. This includes, like I said, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, federal, and other random police that we don't know about. They were just labeled police. Who are these people? Why is the federal government doing this? Why I became this minded, libertarian, is because, it just envelops all of who I am. When I was a kid, I always thought, you should be yourself. You should allow people to go on with their lives without intrusion from a government. And this is exactly what we saw last week at a G20 protest. Actually, that wasn't the only protest that's happened at. There was another protest in 2008 for the Republican National Convention. And this was, I forget exactly when. I want to say around this time last year. Protests in this country have always been peaceful. But when you have the government coming in with such tyrannical force, obviously, they're going to fight for their own protection. Last week they were labeled anarchists. No, they're not. Not necessarily. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe there are some that are anarchists. But in general, basically, all they're doing is protesting the idea of corporatism. That's their own point of view. I don't agree with it. But, that's up to them. The government shouldn't be coming in and forcefully telling them what to think. That's basically what they're doing. Because they can't protest. That you're losing freedom of speech, and they're violating your personal space, your right to your own body. This is the libertarian point of view. You protect yourself, you defend yourself, you are yourself. The government shouldn't tell you who and what to believe. I mean, who to believe in, what to believe in, all that. But that's just one part of the libertarian point of view. The biggest point of view is a sound dollar. I'm moving on to how our dollar is losing value, at least compared to gold, because they keep on printing money, and the bailouts. This is what got me into it in the first place, is the bailouts, and so the first bailout was a $700 billion bill or something. And then they just had, a stimulus package, and then more bailouts everybody except for us people. Why can't we get money? I wouldn't mind money, just give it to me.